What's up, guys? This is David Gordon with another episode of Contra Mundum. Today, I am honored to be joined by my friend and former Rules for Retrogrades co-host, Chris Plance, who now has his own YouTube channel to bring you guys lots of exciting content, and that is, just the Chris Plance channel. So go check that out, you guys. Today, we are fresh off the heels of a travesty of justice that has been created because in the state of Iowa, one Michael Cassidy famously, and to the great jubilation of all of the faithful in America, all the Christians in America, destroyed a statue of essentially Satan that was erected in the Iowa State Capitol building by the Satanic Temple. Kind of a quasi-religious organization that doesn't have any theistic beliefs, who set it up there really as a poke in the eye of Christian America to kind of be send shockwaves through Christian America and really to challenge public displays of religiosity in general. And they're kind of trying to do this to needle people by putting something that's deeply offensive and evil, like heinous evil, the devil himself, statues of the devil, in public places to essentially arouse passions in people and to create judicial crises of jurisprudence where we're using the freedom that Americans have to practice the Christian religion or religions of their choice. They're using that against us in an effort to really hamstring religion and bring it down and make it look hypocritical. So that's the game. Now, a heroic man, Michael Cassidy, who was a former Mississippi congressional candidate, of course, destroyed said heinous, evil statue a couple of weeks back. And he was originally charged with a misdemeanor because, destruction of private property it's a low-grade offense. It's a misdemeanor. But what's broken just this week is that now the scheming weasels in the district attorney's office have chosen to charge him with a hate crime for destroying this statue. And, a hate crime brings this up to a felony. So now he's looking at a significant loss of his rights, his rights that are associated with citizenship. Being a felon, you're deprived of your right to vote. You're deprived of gun rights. You're looking at a prison sentence of over a year. So he has been charged by the statists in a gross abuse of prosecutorial power under 729A2 of the Iowa Criminal Code, which is violation of individual rights, a hate crime. And the statute in question, 729A2, says this: hate crime means one of the following public offenses when committed against a person or a person's property because of the person's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, political affiliation, sex, sexual orientation, age or disability, or the person's association with a person of a certain race, color, religion, ancestry, yada, yada, yada. So he is now facing felony charges in a gross, abuse of prosecutorial authority. And Chris, that was a long opening, and I'm glad you're on. What are your initial thoughts on the situation? Because I know mine, and, we need to rally behind this guy. All of Christian America needs to wake up. We literally are having satanic displays erected in the state capitol buildings, like the most hallowed civil spaces in American society. And it's like kind of raising a flag of victory over the country. I mean, it's very symbolic to get like satanic displays in the state capitol buildings. It's a declaration of victory over the formerly Christian United States of America. So I think we need to fight back hard. But I'll let you have the floor now. What say you, Chris Plance?
Well, I did do a video on my channel responding to Trent Horn's response to this situation, and in that first video I did a few weeks ago, I basically agreed with Trent, and his assessment was that we need to be careful with how we push back on erecting these Satanist statues. How should we respond? He said, well, I mean, if you file a lawsuit against it and they end up winning, then they have greater legal protections, and it sets a precedent which just protects Satanists throughout this country. And so I agreed with that, that that's a solution in the short term. But I think that what this particular incident shows, and there are a lot of them, is that we have been living under political liberalism, whatever you want to call it, which pretends that the state is neutral in matters of worldview or religion. So, in effect, what the state is telling Michael Cassidy is that he needs to live in two different worlds. So he needs to live in a world in which the devil isn't actually real. Jesus didn't come back from the dead. He's not God. And he needs to pretend that that's not actually the way the world actually works, the way the world really works. And so he needs to separate that worldview for the sake of this larger common good, which includes protecting the person who, from his point of view, is the Dark Lord himself, right? And as Catholics, we agree with him. And I think that what this does is it really gives us as Catholics and Christians an opportunity to really think, is the state actually neutral in this case? I mean, think about what the state has done here. The state has just, it's claimed political neutrality. So they're not going to side with any one religion. But here we actually see them siding with a religion, or with a satanic cult that they themselves have actually determined, in effect, is a religion. Now, do we expect the state to actually give us a definition of religion? What is the state's definition of religion? If the state has given us a definition of religion, then it is claiming that it is competent to actually define what religion is, and even define what God is. I think it has a reference in its constitution to a supreme being. And so I think that we're playing a game here that is going to push all of us to the limits of tolerance. And you see it here in this particular case, but it's happening throughout the country. And I think that what Catholics need to wake up to, and this is what I talk a lot about on my channel, is that there really is no such thing as a neutral public square. The state, at the end of the day, is going to have to define what a religion is. It's going to have to define that supreme being that it references in its constitution. What is the supreme being? What are his attributes? What can we know about him according to public reason, the supposedly public reason that's only allowed in the public square, and your religion isn't? So I think that the state pretends political neutrality. And I think this is why, to bring it back to an important topic that you and I are very interested in, which is defending Vatican II, this is precisely why Dignitatis Humanae stripped the rights of the state in a secular state that does not recognize the authority of Christ or the true religion, which is the Catholic Church, which the Dignitatis Humanae says the state has, in the order of justice, has a moral obligation to recognize Christ in the Catholic Church publicly, formally. When it doesn't do that, as Dignitatis Humanae says, it presses religious liberty, because the state of Iowa, because it's not a confessional state, it's not recognizing Christ, it has no competency to define what a religion is. So, and this precisely proves the Second Vatican Council's point, which is that they just defined Satanism as a religion, as a legit religion that needs to be protected. And that's why Vatican II stripped these secular states of any civil authority to coerce in matters of religion. But what we're also finding out, and I'll just conclude here, what we're also finding out is that they have to define religion. They have to, because they live in a state in which the majority of their people actually do believe in God, do believe in Christ. And so I think the sooner we wake up to that, the sooner I think we're going to realize Christ does need to be proclaimed in the public square, the common good. the doctrine of tolerance needs to be taught and also applied. But ultimately, yes, you're going to have increasing protections for groups. And even if they're not serious, I understand Trent Horn made the point that, yeah, they're not really that serious. But it's not a serious Satanist group. It's not like they really believe in Satan. But and that's why to his point, he said we shouldn't be giving them more and more of these precedents in law. So rather than taking them to the court, we could just potentially keep acting civilly disobedient by going and destroying their statues or whatever. So anyway, those are my initial thoughts. There's a lot more that I have, but I'll just kick it back to you, see what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise some very good points. Number one, I mean, I think this goes to the heart of hate crime legislation, because when you have the state wading in and saying, if you attack on the basis for some specific cause, particularly with regard to religion, it does now get the state entangled in defining what a religion is. And I think everybody understands, every just legal layman can look at the wording of the statute and say, obviously compare that with the Temple of Satan, their constitution, what they believe in. And, this isn't a religion. It doesn't profess to be a religion. It's non-theistic. They don't believe in God. They don't believe even in Satan as a supernatural being or even a symbol of evil, but only as a literary symbol that represents the eternal rebel against arbitrary authority and social norms. I mean, that's totally secular. If you look up the dictionary definition, this is like Oxford Learner Dictionary definition of religion. It's the belief in the existence of a god or gods and the activities that are connected with the worship of them. So at face value, something like this, every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there who is not a lawyer can just be like, well, the Temple of Satan, they're not a religion. They're not entitled to religious protection. But just at the face value of what this statute says, this hate crime statute. But then you have the state coming in and it's going to, I mean, at least the prosecutors are attempting to define what, whatever the belief system of the Satanic Temple is as religious belief, and they're redefining religious belief. And now you have a state, which you just said, that is completely incompetent to talk about religious things. And this is very Catholic. We always believed in the two swords of governance. The church has the spiritual sword, and the state, unless it's kind of delegated certain spiritual authorities, is to stay in its lane, and it has the civil sword. So there are two discrete, separate swords, and now the state is trying to wade into religious things and essentially say, all religions, even evil non-religions, are equally tolerable. That everybody has to, give their assent to coexisting in a society with something that is evil and disgusting. So even this facade of neutrality, again, like you said, it's melting away. You see in a society that's built on these like French revolutionary principles of, fraternity, equality, all that stuff, where we're trying to have this classical liberal model of, I'm not going to agree necessarily with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. That's being applied in America, and especially within the religious realm. It's very destructive because you have some very bad ideologies that have poisonous, destructive, noxious fruit, like, say, I don't know, Satanism. And there's essentially no way to exercise a veto on heinous people who petition to put their disgusting altar to the devil, whom they don't even believe in, by the way. Remember that. They petition to do that under the color of religious freedom, and suddenly they're granted license to go into a public place and essentially proselytize for their messed up, stupid cult. And we just have to take it, even though 99.99% of Americans find what they are doing loathsome, find their ideas repulsive. They're actually setting up honors, statues, giving reverence to, the most evil creature in existence and the cause of all human pain. And Christians are just supposed to sit there and take it, because the state, under the color of neutrality, has said essentially that you have to tolerate and respect every single idea, theistic or quasi-theistic, as equal. It just shows deep, gaping holes in this system that kind of secular constitutionalists are trying to navigate. It just doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And this also calls attention, and I'll punt back to you here, but it calls attention, Chris, to the problem of incorporation, the 14th Amendment and the First Amendment altogether, because the text of the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. This was not meant to apply to the states at the time of the ratification of the Constitution. Many, many states had official state religions. So this is a problem that was created by a United States Supreme Court that said, no, the First Amendment means that even the states, not just Congress, but even the states aren't allowed to have religious rules within their jurisdiction. They're not allowed to favor certain religions within their jurisdiction. People have created this problem. Bad jurisprudence has created this problem, whereas actually, even though, America, it had some issues at its founding, it had some blind spots, and it was built on Locke and Enlightenment principles, but this actually wasn't one of them, because this could have been dealt with under the model of federalism. So this is also showing us the stupidity of not just hate crime laws, but of incorporation and modern First Amendment jurisprudence. Yeah, thoughts on that at all?
Well, I mean, that's the first thing. Michael Knowles was just on a podcast right now explaining this to people, that the First Amendment applies just to the federal government. The federal government could not establish state religions precisely because the states were to establish their own religion. I think that the whole point of political liberalism, or to pretend that there is this neutral public square, I think comes from a good intention, which is the fact that we look out there and we see Catholics, we see Protestants, we see Muslims, we see secularists, we see all these different people of different worldviews. And this is true. It's true in America. That's sort of our story, right? You have this group of a bunch of different people coming to this land, establishing a government, and then, even though there are a variety of Christians, Christian denominations, the question is, how do all these people get along? Madison obviously addresses it in Federalist 10, I think it is, or is it? Yeah, I think it was Federalist 10. But I think the idea that people have is the only way we can have true unity. I mean, that's ultimately the question. What do we mean by the United States of America? What does it actually mean to be united, right? I think that people answer that differently. But ultimately, what we're after is, how do you bring a bunch of people from different backgrounds and different worldviews together? I think that one of the things that people saw in the 17th, 18th, 19th century was that religion was starting to be divisive. And especially with the wars between Catholics and Protestants, that it was religion that seemed to not provide the answer for how a state or a nation or an empire could be united. And instead, what was proposed was public reason or science. Science is what can truly unite a nation. If we just bracket religion out and then we put in its place this thing we call science and reason, and then when we come to the public square, all we need to use is science and reason, then we'll be united, right? Because, well, why? Because science is totally neutral, right? And what we're finding here, ironically, is that the very thing that was supposed to unite us, what they told us for the last couple hundred years, science would unite us, is actually dividing us. Look at the differing opinions on science with the vaccines. Look at the climate opinions out there, right? Is there climate change or not? Is it good for us or not? And what we're realizing, or even, are there two sexes? Is there a male and a female? Do those even exist? I mean, like, God's like, you guys want science to unite you, and rather than me and the covenant promises I made in Genesis 12 to Abraham and through my family, fine, go use science. And look where it's led us. When we lose God, the true God, we can't even define a male and a female. And this is what Paul talks about, where when you stop worshiping the creator rather than the creature, you start exchanging all sorts of basic truths, as he outlines it in the beginning of Romans. But we see it here. It's foolish to think that there is such a thing as reason and science that would be able to unite us, that we'd all agree on the science. That even if only people just looked at the facts, right, and saw the facts for what they truly signify, then we would all just be united. And I think that what we're discovering is a couple things. One, science is not a unifying force. In fact, it is it's at the very heart of what's dividing us right now. And second of all, once that's taken care of, you start to see also that there is no such thing as a neutral public square. Because now, one of the things that I tell people is by defining religion, they've been able to bracket religion out. Instead, swap out the separation of church and state, or religion and state, or religion and politics, for worldview. Don't use religion anymore. Just start using worldview. So you're asking this guy who destroyed the Satanist statue, you're asking us to separate. We want you, when you come to the state capitol, we want you to separate your worldview from the state. Separate your worldview from politics. And this is why in the first century, it was impossible. Paul and Jesus and John, the Romans, they knew that to claim that Jesus was God was a political claim, because they didn't know.
Culture comes from cultus. It comes from the Latin for religion. Because religion is the predicate of culture. It defines and serves as foundation for culture and for forming people's minds.
Right. No, exactly. And we're supposed to pretend, we're supposed to have this schizophrenia where we're on certain days of the week, certain times of the day, we're supposed to be religious and have this specific worldview. The creator God exists. He raised Jesus from the dead. Jesus is God. He's enthroned at God's right hand. His ambassadors are the bishops and the Pope. And everything else that goes along with that. We're supposed to pretend that only exists at certain points of the day, certain times of the day, and certain moments throughout the week. But when we come into the public square, we're supposed to act like none of this is true.
Or that it can't define our judgments of people or our friendships and whatnot, as if sharing, first of all, common values with people shouldn't be any basis of our friendship with those people. And then beyond that, even more transcendent, like sharing a common faith with people, a deeper bond, a more intimate belief held in common, that shouldn't somehow form the basis of our judgment of, the merits of another person. We've been convinced that, the content of somebody's character can be fully parsed from their fundamental core moral and religious values. It's all a crock of BS.
No, it totally is. It totally is. And it's been an illusion that the dark powers have used, but really, it's being uncovered, especially in the last decade. It's been ongoing for the last several decades. But in the last decade, we've seen this push for this radical agenda from the left in our schools, in our state capitals. I was in New York several years ago for a wedding, and it was June, and from the state buildings was just flying an LGBT flag. And I was just thinking to myself, this is a worldview. This is an ideology. And this ideology has united itself. This worldview has united itself with the state. And far from being like, this is bad, it's obviously bad because it's the wrong worldview. But I said, of course they're going to unite their ideology, their worldview with the state. But I think the deeper problem is Catholics still think that, oh, come on, we can still reach political neutrality. And I think what our Lord's showing us is like, look, it's what Bonhoeffer, when he was imprisoned by the Nazis and he was executed, his prison letters made it clear that he got to a point where he's like, I think I get it now. If Christ doesn't reign, then the Dark Lord will.
Yeah, dude, no, that's totally right. That's 100% right. There is this illusion that you can have a secular government, but by saying that the government must be secular, by saying that state governments can't favor religion, what you're really doing is kneecapping religion, because then secular philosophies, those are free to be taken up by the government. Those are free to get state sponsorship, like, the LGBT mafia stuff. All of that quasi-religious homo mafia propaganda that can infect every part of the state government. But then you can't have the state, other people in the government advocating for the state to give a platform to Christianity. So it's absolutely right. There's no such thing as, a separation of church and state that does not handicap religion itself. When you have a secular state, what that really means is it favors atheistic philosophies, whether de facto or expressly, but it favors them nevertheless. It's just a truism. There is no such thing as an atheistic or neutral society that does not cast religion actually as a second-class citizen. Because I can go, if I'm like, a great big disciple of like Kant or something, and I can go and argue that Kantian philosophy should be the official state policy. And, I'm good to say that. But if I go and say in Iowa that Iowa should be a Roman Catholic state, nope, I'm not allowed to say that. That couldn't actually happen. If that happened, if the state legislature got together, lower chamber approved it, higher chamber approved it, conference committee, bam, went to the governor's desk, got signed, it would get nixed by the courts. But they could say, we are going to take up this secularist philosophy and we're going to let it, guide the framework of Iowa schools. Iowa schools are going to be Kantian or something like that. They could do something like that. So what it really does is hamstrings religion. We are living in a society that has cast religions, the religious people and religions themselves, in a lower rung. They don't have a place at the table, and of course that's going to benefit secularism and atheism and all of the quasi-religious ideologies and mantras that fit inside that larger penumbra.
100%. And so I think that what we're being asked to do is separate worldview from our politics, or worldview from the state. And I think that we're being asked to do that, but the radical left is being asked to not do that. Why? Because, well, they're staying neutral religiously. They just have their own ideology. And so people are calling this a religion. They're like, well, this has all of the elements of a religion. And what I'm saying is, look, it's just a worldview. That's what it is, people. They look out just like we do, and they see the world working in a certain way. Okay? And they're living their life as if the world view that they have is actually the way the world really works. Right. And I think Catholics are living in a world where they have to pretend that the world hasn't been given over to Christ, that the nations and governments of the world really do need the grace-filled love of the sacraments, right? That the world is in the grip of the dark powers. And unless they've been baptized and are under the sacramental reign of Christ, there is no true freedom. I mean, we're supposed to live as if that isn't true. And more Catholics are like, wait, why do I get to check my worldview at the door when they get to go and just have full reign with their worldview? So I think by define now, religion has gone through a transformation. I want to recommend this book to your audience. It's called by Peter Harrison. It's a book called The Territories of Science and Religion. Okay, published by the University of Chicago Press. The Territories of Science and Religion. And what he does is just show, it's an amazing book, one of the most impactful books on my thinking. He shows the evolution, or not evolution, but the sleight of hand that's happened with the word religion and science. Remember, religion and science for Augustine and Thomas is just a virtue, right? You study the causes, effects and causes, right? For scientia, right? And religion, is just a virtue. It's a moral virtue. Science is an intellectual virtue. There is no such thing as a religion or this particular science. Like biology is a science. The question is whether or not you have science or not. You don't go around and say, hey, what kind of courage do you belong to? What do you mean, what kind of courage do I belong to? It's a virtue. I either have it or I don't. Exactly.
There's so like a gay group courage, though. So you do probably belong to that one, Chris.
But there's a separation of, or you might go to someone and say, hey, what kind of, do you hold to a certain prudence? Like, no, that doesn't make sense. That question doesn't make sense because prudence is a virtue. Religion is a virtue, right? Science is a virtue. It doesn't make sense to someone like Thomas or Augustine to go up to them and say, hey, what religion do you belong to? Because it's a natural virtue. It's like, well, no, I either have religion, like I have prudence, or fortitude. So what's happened in the 16th, 17th century is religion became a set of doctrines because John Calvin started using the word religion differently. It was no longer a virtue. It was now a set of doctrines, right? And science eventually became a list of it was the truths that could be known by natural philosophy, what they called natural philosophy. And so they define these two things, and then you could kind of bracket, well, if you believe in these lists, God, something like the creed, then you're a religion, and we can kind of put you off to the side. So what we need to do is get back to, I think, recovering these two words, religion and science, as virtues, so they can be less manipulated by the secularists. But at the same time, I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to throw something out there. I mean, think about this, you guys. On a fundamental level, why is it worse for a state to say they believe in something and that they endorse something because it's something that is attached or intertwined somehow with a belief in God? Why is it worse for a state to do that than to just endorse a belief in something that isn't entangled with a higher power or a belief in God? Like, who can make sense of that? Fundamentally, that's a fundamental question, because it shows the stupidity of the whole idea of separation of, quote, church and state. It shows the stupidity of it. Like, why can you be a hardcore, Friedrich Nietzsche disciple and, advocate that the state should become Nietzschean, but you can't do that with Christianity? Well, why? What's the fundamental logic there? It doesn't make any sense. It's just why are we handicapping, the divine? Why are we handicapping, what it is to believe in God?
Or even Marxism. I mean, Marx is a classic Epicurean. He did his dissertation on Epicurus, and the Epicurean philosophy, or what we now call Marxism. Well, that's a social theory, and that's a worldview, and it's not a religion. It's just a worldview of how the world works. I'm like, okay, well, there are a bunch of people, this guy that tore down this Satanist statue, that believes that the world works a certain way. And so he was acting out of that worldview, just like as you believe in Marxism, you start to do a bunch of things, right? Like kill millions of people. I think this is also the difference between
destroying the nuclear family.
It's so hard for secularists, liberals, and even guys on the right to understand Islam, right? Well, why can't they just separate their religion? The Middle East. Why can't they just separate? Why can't they just stop doing these things? Why can't they just separate the state from their religion? And it's like, you don't get it, do you? They don't, they're not in Western liberal democracy where they have to pretend these things. Islam believes the world works a certain way, okay? And they're acting out of that belief.
The religion is the state in Islam, and dumb Westerners are like, don't you want separation of religion and state? It's like, no, you idiots, it is the state. That's what they believe.
Right. And it's hard for people in the West to understand that, but it's really not. It's like, look, you believe that marriage is between a man and a man, okay, or it can be between a man and a man. You believe that someone can have a new gender or a new sex. Okay, you believe that the state should be this socialist state. Okay, that's your worldview. All right. And I think that we need to explain to them that you have your worldview. We have our worldview. It's called Catholic social teaching. Okay. And we want to implement the reign of Christ through Catholic social teaching, through those who are submitted to the sacraments. We want them to reign. And we want Christ's teachings to be implemented and supported and proclaimed in the local state that we live.
Well, Chris,
and
this is what you were pointing out earlier. You're kind of prodding at this, but you didn't actually expressly go there. I want to go there right now. It's really pathetic, dude, that you have people on the left that are like, having these ridiculous protests, like chaining themselves to fences, lying down in front of traffic, all of the, melodramatic acts of like symbolic speech that are going on right now over things like, oh, you won't let this man use the woman's locker room at your daughter's high school. Oh, you're evil. You're a bigot. You're not even American. You're practically a Nazi because you don't want this guy's junk dangling around like in front of your underage daughter in her, own restroom. But they'll go to all these lengths to take this and push this and be like, the state needs to be on board with the LGBT agenda. Equality, you guys. We need this. We need gay marriage. We need transsexual bathroom equality. We need men to be boxing with women, men wearing wigs, like boxing women and like breaking their jaws and all that stuff. They'll go to the mat for it. But this is why Christians are losing, because we have our weird, like pale, chunky, constipated neighbors, like Catholics and Protestant Christians that are like, well, I just want a neutral square. I just want a neutral forum. I just want the state to be neutral. It shouldn't favor anybody's group, not mine, not yours, and all these dweebs. That's the conventional wisdom, dude. Like, that's what they're parroting. Like, so of course we're losing. Of course we're getting annihilated. Because we have all of, like, the pasty doughboys that are, like, lukewarm on their religion, poorly catechized, and they're just happy. They're fighting for the middle. They're fighting for neutrality. And the left is fighting for dominance. How the heck do you win a culture war if you're fighting for neutrality and the left is fighting for dominance? How does that happen?
Yeah, I don't. I think that I think we have to sort of discern the spirit and the signs of the times. I think that people are fighting for neutrality and saying, hey, keep this specific agenda out of our schools. And then the other side's fighting and saying, this isn't like an agenda. This is just how things work. Like, and I think people are waking up. I think it's going to take some time, Dave, honestly. But I think people are waking up. There are already several Catholic groups out there, Protestant thinkers, many faculty that are waking up, and they have been for several decades. So I think it's starting to trickle down a little bit, and more Catholics are waking up to it. More and more Catholics are also waking up to the church's teaching on this, that there are rights that are afforded to God and his Son. Jesus says, all authority on earth has been given to me when he came back from the dead. And so he has rights. That means that there is an obligation by the state to recognize that the rights that they have, that Caesar has, that the state of Iowa has, are really the obligations they have is to recognize Christ and recognize his church, that he's delegated that authority, that teaching, right? So if the church has a teaching on subsidiarity, then the state has an obligation to recognize that teaching coming from Christ.
Yeah.
If the church has a teaching against abortion and the protection of the unborn, then the state needs to recognize this isn't just the Pope saying this. This is the authority of the person who it has the authority, has all of the authority, right? If the church has, if the state, or sorry, if the church has this teaching that the state has an obligation to support Catholic schools monetarily, then the state needs to recognize that, because the church has that teaching, and it needs to, but it will not recognize this if it doesn't recognize the authority behind it, which is Jesus Christ our Lord.
Well, all of this is forbidden, bad under the current American system of jurisprudence, and the jurisprudence that relates to the First Amendment as, incorporated into the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, where these things that we're supposed to, remember, the Constitution is federal. So these provisions that were only supposed to bind the federal government have now been bastardized and weaponized to apply to the states. And it's actually really hurt people in the realm of states' ability to control public morality and to regulate things religious. So that's like the meta picture, though. I think we've done a pretty good job here of pointing out like the ridiculous idea of a secular state and all the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity nonsense and classical liberal nonsense, that we need to have a government that, kind of treats evil and good on the same hand. It doesn't recognize truth in any of the religions. As a matter of fact, it's a cardinal sin for the government to recognize that a religion is true, even if that religion is true. So you're basically setting yourself up to predicate government on falsehood, or at least being deliberately blind. And it makes for bad policy. And we're seeing now some of those things, as you again mentioned, as public morality has fallen. We've kneecapped religion, yada, 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 and now public morality is at an all-time low. We're seeing some of these clashes playing out before our eyes that we wouldn't have expected we would ever see before. I didn't think when I was like 18 that we would ever see people seriously erecting statues to Satan in state houses. I would never have thought that. It's too far-fetched. There's just, everyone suspects that decency will hold. But now these fights are being put before us. So we're going down now another rung, because first of all, you have this idea that governments must be neutral, that it's like this chief moral impetus that governments must stay neutral in anything that touches on religion. Now, coming from that, this sort of codification in the Constitution, federal Constitution, First Amendment, is this idea that somehow all religious belief is equal and must be treated as equal. And if you have any judgment or, fail to treat as equal an inferior religion, then you are somehow a very bad person. And that has translated into hate crime laws, like the one we're seeing in Iowa. Like, this is the fruit, I think, and tell me if you agree, of that initial, First Amendment, French Revolution, Enlightenment, classical liberalism idea of, a facially neutral on religion government. We're seeing that bearing certain fruit, and it's causing problems. And now we have this derivative problem from that, which is states are codifying that if you destroy the property of like a satanic temple that is being displayed someplace, which is of course a virtuous act, really. I mean, think about the idea of the Christmas tree, and you have a saint that's going and chopping down the thunder oak where pagans were offering sacrifices, human sacrifices. That's an act of virtue. To destroy a publicly placed and supposedly publicly venerated statue of the Dark Lord is an act of virtue. But now the state, under these under the veneer of equality for all religions, all you have to do is say your religion, and then you're entitled to all these protections, and you're entitled to this legal fiction that you are equal with the religion that was begun by Christ himself, the Catholic Church. They're enjoying all these protections, and now we are prosecuting people for doing virtuous acts and destroying venerated evil. I mean, yeah.
Well, I think that we need a different game plan, and we need to think in terms of centuries rather than just decades. And what I have proposed and what I'm working on with several others right now, as I think as you do know, is the Cristero Party, and which is a Catholic political party that's going to try to that's going to do exactly what we were saying, which is to make Christ king, to proclaim Christ as king, and to recognize him as king at the state level. And it's going to be, an international party. It's not just going to be in California. It's not just going to be in the 50 states, but it's going to be worldwide. And I think that we have to think in terms of centuries, that we have to set something up for the future generations, for our kids and grandkids and great grandkids, because we cannot keep going down this path where we have two parties that basically agree that the state should be neutral. The only difference really with the conservative movement, the Republican Party, is they believe a little bit more of that public reason part. They believe that public reason can get to a generic theistic God, so they have no problem with, placing your hand on the Bible even, but just saying, yes, God exists. We need to recognize him. We've always recognized him, that he exists, and that's it. Public reason can know his existence and maybe a few of his attributes, but you can't really get to that whole Catholic stuff, the whole Jesus stuff. And that's another topic, because the Epicureanism that runs through the American project also has bracketed out historical reason, whether or not God has made himself present and active in history. But that's an aside. But I think that both parties, the Republican and the Democrat Party, are going to continue down this path where we should still strive to political neutrality. Meanwhile, one radical group and another radical group and another radical group come along, and they're like, wait, we can't separate our worldview from our politics. And so they'll keep implementing what they're implementing, how they believe the world works. And I think Christians in large measure are just going to continue to pretend that we can still reach this political neutrality. So I think in the long term, we have to think in terms of centuries. I think we need to think of our states being confessional Catholic states, recognizing Christ and proclaiming his great love for humanity and the church's teachings. But we have to think of, this is not something we're going to accomplish in the next 50, 60, 100 years. This is something we're going to accomplish in 200, 300 years. California's original constitution, its northern constitution, recognized Christ as king. I like to think of California as, if France is the eldest daughter of the church, California is the youngest daughter of the church. And she proclaimed in that
now she's like the purple-haired lesbian daughter that went off to an Ivy League school of the church.
Well, she's not really of the church. She's left, but she's the prodigal daughter that can come home, hopefully. But
she's been knocked up and has a nose ring at this point.
Yeah. But I think that Catholics need to think like long term. I think when Paul went to Rome to tell Caesar, and we don't have the account of it, but presumably he got his trial or his court case heard by Caesar, and he was able to tell what he told the Ephesians, or hinted at with the Ephesians, that he was going to tell Caesar, which is that Christ is Lord. That he didn't imagine in the next several centuries. He didn't know the timeline. When is Christ actually going to convert the Roman Empire and proclaim Christ as king? Well, it took a while. And so we have to think in terms of, what's our mission here? What is our commitment to? Our commitment is to Christ, is to sanctify the temporal order as the laity. The bishops have a distinct vocation as the ambassadors of Christ, not the rulers of Christ. Right? They proclaim the church's teaching. They're his ambassadors sent by him. And we're supposed to pick up that message, come under the sovereign reign of the sacraments, and proclaim Christ as king and govern on his behalf in fulfillment of the biblical story. And the fulfillment of the promises made in Genesis 12. So all of that is to say, we need a different strategy. We need a different missiology, if you would. And I think that's going to involve, at least in my mind, a distinct Catholic political party that we saw in Mexico, not just the National Catholic Party, but the Cristero Party that really wanted to make Christ his king. So I think that's the long-term goal. I think Trent Horn is probably right. In the meantime, we need to not take these Satanists to court because it's gonna create legal precedent to protect them.
No, I hard disagree. I think you need competent lawyers to argue this in court, and we have to. This is the mantra of kind of like conventional Republicans for a long time, because we had Nixon and Eisenhower in putting in like Chief Justice like Berger or like Earl Warren. These are Republican appointments. It's like now Republicans are understanding a little bit more what's at stake with judicial appointments, and they're starting to clean things up, and we're getting some more principled conservative jurists, not just on the high bench, but on all federal courts.
So what would your argument be then?
I think you need to litigate this, and you need to have competent attorneys, not just the average law school graduate who like kind of mumbles some gibberish and thinks like, all that theology stuff is for the birds, and, doesn't have time to study that because they're like looking over the law of torts or something. You have to have competent practicing attorneys who are also well-versed in the Christian faith and want to go to bat for it and construct really solid and ingenious arguments, and kind of like what the left has had for so long. They've had zealous representation. You think about like in Roe v. Wade, you have a couple feminist attorneys who were looking for the right clients so that they could get so they could challenge abortion laws and eventually get, abortion recognized as quote unquote a constitutional right, or an outgrowth of a couple of the amendments in the Constitution. They are zealous, and we just, we put somebody up that's just like some random practitioner who might be pretty good at arguing like in civil litigation matters before the courts, but has no particular like penchant for doing theology. And therefore you get these kind of, they're okay arguments, I guess, but they're nothing special. They're not as zealously advocated as the issues should be. When you're passionate about something, that comes through in your work, and you tend to be more creative and you dig deep and for the W. And that's what the other side's had for so long. I think, if you have competent practitioners and you have good jurists who are not just the kind of milquetoast and centrist moderates who have no deeply rooted judicial philosophy, no principled judicial philosophy, no articulable judicial philosophy, but more like the hunch theory of jurisprudence, then you're asking for trouble. But I think that's become a thing of the past, because Republicans have seen how much damage has been done by the courts going all the way back to, say, FDR and the New Deal, and they've woken up and they've really started fighting back, especially after the gay marriage decision came down. We had a couple decisions come down in, the Kennedy years with in the Obama presidency we see the stakes are high now. Some bad decisions, even worse than some of the previous precedent. And I think a lot of people have woken up. So I do think we need to fight in the courts.
I would love to hear that conversation between you and Trent, and maybe we can make a little debate out of it. Host you guys on my channel. I might send you guys an email. Have a friendly conversation, friendly debate. Because I think that, he has court. He brought up in his video court cases where he shows that like you're probably not going to win in court, but I mean, maybe you could make the argument that you could.
I mean,
And
it's just
change
like
the
Roe
ship
v.
around.
Wade. It's just like Roe v. Wade, dude. It's obviously wrong. It was obviously wrongly decided. You know, the First Amendment's incorporation was a travesty, his judicial travesty, and terribly decided. And, you know, history is on our side. So this is another thing where
Yeah,
you
but
get like an
history's on your
Alito
side. But
opinion where it's like, stare decisis doesn't hold here. They don't, you
well,
know, this was wrongly decided. And here's the clear legal argument in favor of the First Amendment not binding, not applying to the states. If you're, you know, you don't even need to be a jurist to know this. You just need to like study a history book.
yeah, but I mean, if you're the courts have their own interpretation of the Constitution, their own constitutional philosophy, right? And so, how do you know you need the right people in place that can give you a favorable decision?
Well, there's no
And
guarantees in life, you know, but we're going to lose if you don't go to court. Right now, it's the only answer, dude. Like, it's been decided. These issues have been decided by the court and, you know, under the color of the United States Constitution, which, due to the supremacy clause, you know, that's the supreme law of the land. So you can't touch this with statutes. There's no way to undo this, you know, officially. Obviously, you can kind of veto some of these policies like our friend Michael Cassidy did, and we're going to circle back around to that in a second. You can kind of veto that at the popular level, but you can never officially cancel some of these awful policies that are being rolled out by states and the neutrality that is being extended, and even like the kind of endorsement because you are ceding state space to altars to Satan. You're never going to be able to reverse course on that officially without going through the courts. So everything else is a half measure. And I don't want to deal with half measures anymore. It's too frustrating. Every bit of progress that you do make outside of court is ultimately brought into conformity with the awful judicial decisions that gave us this framework where states like aren't allowed in any way to favor, you know, the true and real religion. So it's all going to be a half measure, and I don't want it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I'll set up an email with you and Trent, see if we can get something going, because I think that would be a fruitful discussion, honestly. What's the pathway forward and for how to deal with issues like this? You know, rather than just speaking in the clouds and saying, well, there's no such thing as neutrality. What's the next move? What do we do?
Right.
Start a political party is the totally. And start a political party is the long-term idea that I'm proposing. But in the short time, I mean, I agreed with Trent that I just think it would be a fruitful discussion. I'll reach out to him and see if we can get something going.
Let's get granular here for a second. I want to hear your take on Michael Cassidy, what this guy did, smashing up this satanic display. What are your thoughts on what he did? And, you know, what should we be doing now that he's been charged with a hate crime, with a felony? He's looking at the loss of significant rights and a serious blemish on his resume, on his good name. What's his?
Well, I mean, each person has to make their own prudential decision in the situation that they've been given, you know, and the obligations that they have to their government, to the common good, and also to their families, especially knowing and balancing the risks of what's at stake. You know, I think that you know, his intentions were good. Satan should not be propped up. A statue of Satan should not be propped up in a state capital like that, especially when presumably the common good, the majority of people living in Iowa are Christians. So I have no problem with what he did, with, you know, removing the statue.
Of course not, dude. It's like St. Boniface chopping down the Thunder Oak. It's to be commended. And there's a lot of examples of saints doing things just like this. It's destroying a statue to Baal. Yeah. He should be, in my estimation, commended for this. And I was a little bit sad that there were fewer people like champing at the bit to do exactly what he did. This should not be, you know, a one-off incident. If we are at the point of societal decay where we are actually glorifying evil, and people are like winking and nodding and snickering to themselves, these pathetic, godless, shameless people are snickering to themselves, thinking they've gotten the better of all of the Christians that live in the United States of America, a majority, by far, a majority Christian nation. People need to be coming out of the woodwork to do exactly what Cassidy just did. And the fact that this is like one guy and it wasn't immediate and there wasn't like a rush on this thing by like 1,000 people that lived in close proximity to the Iowa Capitol, just,
Like
that
there was
actually is
Saint
disheartening.
Sarah statues.
Yeah, exactly, man. Like, compare this to the left. Compare this. How can we win when we have so many cowards and the left has so many zealots? I mean, they're people. You look at them. They're not much to look at. They're purple-haired, muffin-topped, noodle-armed wimps. But, they come out. They got nothing to do. They don't work. So they come out and like bang drums on a Tuesday. But they get out and they get it done. They pull down statues. They deface property. And of course, the prosecutors, they're not getting too many hate crime charges leveled against them. And the statues, once they're down, stay down. I'll bet there's going to be like a gold-plated, statue to Baphomet erected next in honor of the poor statue that was destroyed by Cassidy. But they show up. There's hundreds of them. They march. They get out there. They get on bullhorns. They chant. They deface property, and they're strong at it. And we have one guy that does something like this, and we're supposed to be like in awe that this happened. This should be the norm, right?
Well, I think that the reason why more people aren't responding to it is because I think the silence is telling. I think people realize that we're at a point where Christians are going to have to make some really tough decisions and desire the greater glory of Christ for the good of the nation, not just for the salvation of souls, but for the common good, for societal good. And I think you're right. I mean, look at what they did to St. Sarah. They have, again, a view of the world, a philosophy that has led them zealously to go and tear down St. Sarah's statue. I agree. I think more and more Christians are waking up. I think there are a lot of books being written right now addressing this topic, and I think a lot of Christians are divided on it in general. But we know as Catholics that the Church has already defined it in our tradition. The Church has already defined what is a matter of justice, which is to recognize the rights that are afforded to God, that Jesus is right when he says all authority on earth has been given to him. He's been enthroned at God's right hand. And that means something for those of us who think it's actually true.
Yeah, no, totally. I want more people to wake up, and I want to see more people waking up, as opposed to hopefully, talking about it. Oh, books are being written, so this has to like needle people's consciences. I don't know, man. I think Christians are too fat and too comfortable now, and they won't get motivated to do things. They don't want to deal with this. They don't want to deal with getting charged with a misdemeanor, let alone a felony, spending a night in jail, or let alone a longer time for, felony offense. So they're not doing it in the numbers that we need, because you can't, if you get, 10,000 people that go in and each person kind of like breaks off one appendage of the statue, it's going to be harder to deal with 10,000 people and to, vilify 10,000 people and to make martyrs of 10,000 people than if it's just one guy standing alone, then you just lop off his head. And I think that is what they're doing here. They're making an example of him and really, putting the screws in by charging him with a felony for what he did. He broke apart a statue, and now he's looking at over a year in prison, possibly for that, which is going to upend, of course, his life, or at least has the potential to. So I really do think that, he needs to make sure he has a zealous defense, which, I mean, let's talk about that for a second. The Satanic Temple, again, does not believe, it's not a theistic organization. They don't believe in God. So at face value, this stupid hate crime statute doesn't even apply because it talks about religion. If you destroy property, and you're motivated by an animus towards somebody's religion, even under this framework of neutrality that there's been foisted on us by a misapplied constitution. Of course, the Constitution itself is a product of the Enlightenment. Even under that, it still doesn't go. It still doesn't fit, right? Because this is not a religious group. They're a group that is dedicated to essentially treating Satan not as a real guy, not as a god, not as a deity or even an entity, but as just a literary figure for rebelliousness. And now, because we disagree, and there's somebody has destroyed this homage to a literary figure for rebelliousness, for these secularist people, these atheistic people, this atheistic organization, then essentially they're getting the person who destroyed this property faces the specter of a serious stint in prison. It's totally ridiculous. It's unfair. It's a travesty of justice. That's why I say it's prosecutorial misconduct. And then this circles back to what we were talking about before. Unless the state has created some asinine, arbitrary definition of religion, like it's any deeply held belief or something like that, that the individual subjectively chalks up to being on par with, a theistic kind of fervor or something like that. You have the state that has a disdain for religion, that can't favor religion, and now they're defining what it is to be a religion. You walk into all of these, minefields and all of these, just travesties of thought, of rationality, of justice. It's a bad place. But why isn't he arguing that? Why isn't he like, this isn't even a religion? They don't believe in this. So I just trashed their stupid little mascot and they don't believe in him.
I mean, I don't know what else to say to that. I think that's a pretty good that's a pretty good summary of kind of what we've been saying. I do think that Catholics need to recognize that moments like this are not just tragic. They're also part of how we see the world working. Joseph was sold into a prison by his brothers who betrayed him, betrayed by his own brothers. And God worked it out for good. He ends up being given certain gifts that allows him to sit at the right hand of the king Pharaoh. And actually, Jesus' story, as scholars point out, is sort of a retelling of it's the Joseph story 2.0, or really 3.0, because the Daniel descending into the lion's den and then being raised up to the king's right hand is the Joseph story, descending into prison and then coming up out of it and sitting at the right hand. And Jesus is descent into hell and then his coming back from the dead and then sitting at God's right hand is just it's a Daniel and, did I say David earlier? Sorry, Daniel and Joseph. Yeah,
feeding people with wheat, even
exactly, 100. Yeah, exactly. The nations, and also the nations. So yeah, so the point is those are political visions right there. The third one, the 3.0, or that's not a apolitical message. Jesus is sitting at the right hand of the Father. So Daniel 7 says that is the biggest political message, that all authority on earth has been given to him. But at the end of the book of Genesis, it ends with the line that says, "You meant this for evil, but God meant this for good, to save many lives." And I think that we need to see instances like this, or the other pro-lifers who have been convicted, like of 11 years or something like that recently in the news. There are moments where, people meant this for evil, the dark powers mean it for evil, but God meant it for good. And I think part of that, at least if we can discern it right now, is that Catholics are waking up to the fact that, like we said earlier, that sort of what Bonhoeffer got to when he was imprisoned, his prison letters sort of bear witness to it. He's like, whoa, there is no, we need Christ. Christ's reign is global. It's cosmic. and that if he's not reigning someone else, the dark powers are going to put someone else in his place. So anyway, long story short, I think that we also need to also not despair, come up with a plan, but also remember that God is working out some good from these little instances in which people are being prosecuted. Look at Paul,
Sure,
Paul
man,
for example. Paul,
Go ahead.
Paul, when Paul's imprisoned, he takes this as an opportunity to appeal to Caesar, you know, and the people are like, dude, what did you just do? You're going to get let off the hook. And here you appeal to Caesar. And from his captivity epistles and from Acts, you kind of get the sense that Paul saw this as an opportunity. He wanted to go to Rome anyway, to go tell Caesar that Jesus is Lord and that Caesar must be baptized and govern in Christ's name as a layman. But Paul took this as an opportunity. He's like, this is great. I'm also a Roman citizen. And if I appeal to Caesar, that means the guys have to actually put me on a boat and take me to Caesar. And then my case gets to be heard by Caesar. And I think Paul was like, yeah, I'm not going to talk to him about my court. When he asked me my opinion, I'll be like, yeah, whatever. You can convict me if you want. But what I came here to tell you is that God planned this arrest so that I could come before you and tell you Jesus Christ is Lord. Jesus Kyrios. Which, of course, Caesar's like, whoa. Kaiser Kyrios, man. You're stealing my title. Paul's like, no. Jesus Kyrios. You know, Jesus Christ is Lord. And all authority has been given to him. And you, Mr. Caesar, have his image stamped on you. And so you owe him allegiance to govern properly, wisely, justly in his name, in fulfillment of the Danielic oracles, in fulfillment of the Genesis 12 prophecy, to unite the nations under the sovereign reign of the Pax Christi, not the Pax,
Romana.
the Romana. So I think I think we can see this court case this charge as sort of one of those moments for all of us to reflect on and say, okay, there's good that's going to come out of this. Let's support our brother, just as Luke was with. Let's not flee, right? Because Demas had fled. Paul says in his later letter to Timothy, I think it is, where he says, Demas had left me because he fell in love. He, fell back in love with the joy, the pleasures of the world. And Luke, that sad line where Paul says, Luke alone is with me. Luke stayed with him. And I think, we need to stay with one another, even if, we get arrested or whatever the case might be. But we need to do what Paul did and what we see him doing in the captivity epistles, which is getting ready to proclaim Christ as king to the nations. And in this case, it was Caesar for him. And so
okay, let me jump off that for a second. Let me kind of springboard on that. Yeah, I agree. I think, we need to come to our brother's aid. We need to, when somebody does something like this, they kind of have a fervor of the Lord within them. They have the zealous spirit. Obviously, they deserve our support, and people should keep them in prayer and come to their aid, and hopefully be inspired by their Christian bravery. This fortitude that this man had to do this thing and risk legal sanctions on him. That should inspire other people. And you see, obviously, Paul doing that. And if you read Acts, it's hard to read Acts and not come away a little bit inspired and inflamed with the Holy Spirit to do greater things in your own life, obviously. And that's one of the parts of, that's what happens in confirmation. You get the Holy Spirit, you become a soldier of Christ. That's why they used to give you a good slap, because you're becoming a soldier for the Lord, and you're to go out there and to be ready to die. One of the graces of confirmation is that you are now ready to die for the faith, and it gives you strength to not flee from death. So sure, we have that aspect, but you said something interesting about wanting to go before Caesar, and this is an idea that I had. This is the second part of this. Not only should I think we support him, and the prosecutor should never have charged this case, I don't think. I hope he gets good defense attorneys, Christian defense attorneys, who are going to support him and advocate for him and make cunning arguments in his defense, and do a lot of motion work in this, because I don't even think there's a cause to be charged here. At least for, of course, the hate crime, the felony. But beyond that, he needs to take this to the governor. Where's the governor, dude? Who's the governor of Iowa? Why didn't I look this up before? Governor of Iowa. Let me just look this up. Okay, Kim Reynolds. Kim Reynolds is a Republican. She's the governor of Iowa. Where is she on this one? Why is she not out there? Why doesn't he take his case to her? He's like Paul to Caesar. Write her. Be like, hey, do you see what's unfolding in your state? You know, she spoke out against the statue. Of course, you know, paid lip service to, oh, this statue bad, you know, Satan bad. I can't believe we have to say that in modern political discourse, but apparently we do. So she spoke out against it to score the political points. Now let's see about what are you going to do about it? So write to her, write to Governor Reynolds.
Yeah.
Hey, can I get a pardon? Like, will you pardon me so I don't have to worry about this? What a political statement it would be by her if she just preemptively said, hey, you know, this guy, just plead guilty. Plead guilty to it because I'm gonna pardon you right now. So we're gonna get this behind me. Or my successor. If this isn't adjudicated during my tenure, then you know what? I've talked to the lieutenant governor. I've talked to you know, any successors that we would have from the Republican Party, and they've also pledged to pardon you. So take the case and make this issue political. Make this act of religious courage a political thing. And yeah, let's get it a bigger forum. Let's have the governors weigh in. Let's have the governors have to take a stance on whether or not it's okay to erect a statue of Satan in the Capitol building, and not just take an empty stance, you know, a flaccid stance where they don't have to do anything about it and they can just give a sound bite to the news so that a few moderate voters suddenly decide that they're going to vote for them in the next election because they said swell things and they really believe in Christian principles. No, do something. This is your time to do something. Kim Reynolds, say, no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome of this case is, you should drop it now, prosecutors, because we're going to pardon them. And by the way, I've instructed the state attorney general to look into your office now and to look in the practices of your office now to see what's going on there. Because what is this, Soros money? Is like, are you getting pressure from outside groups to prosecute people, which would really be a breach of prosecutorial ethics, you know, being compelled or impelled to prosecute somebody where you don't think that the case is necessarily there based on the actual statute that the charges are predicated upon. You know, we're going to look into you. So not only am I going to pardon this guy, but your political career and possibly your legal career, you know, district attorney, deputy district attorney, is going to be in jeopardy. So it's not looking so good to go after this man for doing something that accorded with his conscience and good Christian living, is it? Why don't we put them on defense? I don't know. That's my little shtick. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, yeah, sure. It's good.
All right.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah. I do want to pick
me.
I do want to pick up the conversation with Trent. I think Trent would be really good. I'd love to hear a little bit of his pushback. I think you guys are both smart, and it's a good conversation to have within you know, amongst brothers, Catholic brothers.
And Trent's a great guy too. Like, he's always welcome on the channel. You know, I've spoken with him a couple times. He came on actually a mic'd up episode that I did that never got released through Church Militant. Whole other thing. But you know, a great guy. And even the points where I disagree with Trent, he's very reasonable. He's responsible. He's not just out there doing clickbait. When he says something, he actually believes it, and he's of goodwill. So I think if you make a strong point to him, he's the type that's going to acknowledge that and not just cling
for sure.
to
100%.
like some facile argument trying to dispute with you for
100%.
or as a vainglory. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's great. Yeah, he's really good. So
come on my channel, Trent.
Yeah. Well, I'll reach out. I'll
man.
send an email to you guys and I can moderate it. I think it would be and I'll jump in a little bit. It'll be a little less formal, but I think it'd be a good discussion to have.
All right, dude. Well, okay. So in closing here, I've kept
Christ
you
is
for a
king.
while. So thank you kindly for coming on the show. We've been talking about doing something like this for a while, so I'm glad we were able to make it happen. What closing words? Why don't you close the show out, Chris, and just what do people need to hear? Where can they find your channel, first of all?
Yeah.
Where can they find your writings? And then, final thoughts on this incident and just kind of close us out.
Yeah, so you can, if you want to find my channel, just type in Chris Plance on YouTube channels, search for channels, and you'll find it there. I talk a lot about these issues. I talk about the story of the Bible, the mission of the church, and the politics of the world. And I sort of situate my channel at the intersection of those three highways as they meet and cross paths. So you can also go to my website, chrisplance.com. And I also have a chrisplance.locals.com, where I do a lot of just extra teaching on scripture, on Catholic theology. But I would say, we have to remember, if I'm speaking to the Catholic laity, I'm sure there are some priests listening in, but for us Catholic laity, this is our vocation. Our vocation is to sanctify the temporal order. And sanctify the temporal order doesn't mean just merely helping the state reason well, or having really good schools where we show how science really ought to be done. To sanctify the temporal order is to bring it under the reign of Christ. And that includes evangelization and mission, but it also includes the high vocation of politics, through which Christ can govern the nations, through those who have submitted themselves to the sacramental reign of Christ. That have had their sins forgiven, that are being made holy, that are increasing their love for God and their love for their neighbor. And I think that Catholics need to pray for the social reign of Christ. We need to really ask the martyrs, the Cristero martyrs in Mexico, to pray for us. This is something they spilled their blood for. They wanted Christ to be put back in Mexico's constitution. They wanted the Catholic Church proclaimed again in Mexico's constitution. And I think that we ought to long for that as well. And I think it is difficult. I think that it's humanly impossible, as Scott Hahn always says, but we're not dealing with human causes here. We're dealing with supernatural grace. It's a supernatural war that's happening right now. It's a spiritual war that's happening right now. And the main thing is to remember the story, how the story works, right? God created us to rule and govern his creation. We gave that vocational call over to the dark power who reigns through sin and death. And God chose Abraham's family to be the means by which sins would be forgiven, the human race would be reunited, and the creation itself would be rescued. Follow that along. Jesus Christ is the Son of David, who has come to fulfill the promises of Genesis 12, to fulfill the promises and prophecies of 2 Samuel 7, of Daniel 7. And through him, we are having our images renewed, as Paul talks about in Romans and elsewhere. And the whole point of us having our images renewed in the new Adam is so that we can reign on Christ's behalf for his glory and for the rescue of the human race and all of creation. So remember that story. Never forget that story. As long as we live within that story, the Spirit will give us what we need to discern what's happening now in our world and how we might be able to advance that kingdom in the future.
For shizzle. All right, man. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Listening to the show. Everybody else, we're going to be coming out with some new content in the coming weeks. I know it's been slow lately, been a lot of things going on, but we're going to get back to it in the coming weeks. So thanks so much for tuning in. Please do kindly support us on Patreon if you have the means or the desire. And also, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. And we will see you next show. Peace.